It's really incredible to consider that people graduating from high school this year weren't even born the year that I first started playing video games. First video game I ever played was the good old Mattel Electronics Football 2. Was there a Football 1? Who cares? Yeah, Football 2. I mean, this isn't the re-release they made a few years ago. This is the real one that took an actual 9-volt battery and had a real light emitting diode display. And also, remember this? This is not a calculator. So, yeah, so you'd have some little red flashing lights, and you really didn't know what was going on, but you could. It was football somehow or another, and somehow or another back then, I had a blast playing this. And then I got the Sega Game Gear, my first true video game console. And this thing, I remember playing through the first level of Sonic the Hedgehog on this, and getting to the end, and then realizing, wow, there's like that's just the first stage. There are more stages, and then you get to Robotnik, and you're like, wow, like that's there are more worlds after this. I mean, that was just multiple levels and stages and worlds in a game with completely different themes and motifs. I mean, I just remember back then you had to look through the instruction manual if you wanted to read the storyline for a game, and I remember reading that a mad scientist is turning animals into robots. Like, what? I have to stop him. I have to stop this madness and save the animals. And it was just such a blast playing this thing. I have a whole article I wrote on my site about my experience with the Game Gear. And if you think console wars are fierce and bloody now, back then it was a totally different story. Nowadays, if you want to make fun of some system you don't like or call someone a mean name for playing a different system than the one you choose, you just have to go online and just press a button. Back then, if you wanted to diss somebody for playing a different game than the one you chose, you had to go and say it in face to their person in person. And nowadays, like, if you go start a console flame war, you could at worst maybe get banned. Back then, if you wanted to start a flame war, you could end up with a black eye. I mean, Game Boy and Game Gear, the it was probably even fiercer than Genesis versus Super Nintendo. I mean, you had a great game selection, you had great battery life, but no color, no backlight, and this had full color games you could play in the dark, and the image of just being bathed in the light of the backlight of this screen. It is almost like a tube set, this screen. Just being bathed in the light of this thing and the backseat of my parents' car, as we're driving late at night, that image is gonna be with me for the rest of my life. My beautiful, wonderful memories with the Sega Game Gear. This is where it all began for me. And Game Boy. I mean, back then the commercials they were fierce. Like, there was a Sega Game Gear commercial that literally flat out said that if you choose this over this, you're a moron. They flat out insulted Game Boy owners in their commercials, and that probably led to them alienating a lot of their potential clientele. And the Game Gear didn't stick around for that long. And this thing ate through batteries. It was absolutely absurd the batteries this thing ate through. And the 3DS has the lowest battery life of any Nintendo system, but it's always charged when you leave the house because you always have it on the dock. The batteries are rechargeable, so you get home, you just drop it on the dock and charges up. This, you had to buy 6 of these things every 3 or 4 hours, and you had, oh wow, there's a battery in here that's all corroded. Oh no. Oh no. Oh well. I should have taken care of that before I started filming. But anyway, yeah, you had these 2 big grips you'd stick in the back of this, and each one was like a battery thing. That give you some more battery life, and at least you could charge it back up. But then what they came out with, this big grip you'd put in the back, and you actually screw it in here, and those put into the battery base. But this power back thing, I don't have it anymore. That actually plugged. You screwed it into the back, and it was an extra grip, and you put it in here. Not like do you really need an extra grip to get a hold of this thing? I mean, look how huge this thing is. This is, if you've never held one of these in your own hands, especially if you're like younger or don't have experience with older systems, this thing feels comically huge, even more so than the Game Boy. Yeah, I did not get my hands on Game Boys for a number of years after. Actually, a few Game Boys came in my house uh, back before I adopted that as my system of choice, and for various reasons, they ended up in pieces on the basement floor, like smashed against the wall. Long story there, but yeah, Game Boy was. We were definitely a Game Gear household growing up, a Sega household. Uh, yeah, so Game Gear games are coming on the Virtual Console tomorrow. I cannot wait. I can tell you, man, Sonic the Hedgehog, and you only get so far when you're a little kid. And think of this: there's no save feature, there's no sleep mode. So you're playing, you're sitting down somewhere in a waiting room or something with your parents or whoever you're with, and you're playing this thing for a minute. And you get a minute in, okay, time to go. You switch it off, and you just lose all your progress, and you don't even think twice about that. That's just par for the course. And you're like 4 levels in. All right, time to go. You switch the thing off. It's like I can't. I could never go back to playing like that now. It was just such a different world back then. You had no expectation of a save feature or sleep mode. Sonic, and you only get so far. Especially, well, the games are fairly tough, and plus being a little kid and not being that experienced, you relied on those continues to get further in the game and see as much as you could. And I never got to the end of Sonic for Game Gear back in the day, but and then if you wanted to see new Sonic stuff, then you'd have to buy Sonic 2. And I remember Sonic 2, I never even got past I got past the first world only one time back then. Then I remember like back then, like sort of Game Gear and the home console at the time, there was a when you're a little kid and you're not that knowledgeable about games, there's really not much that of a difference graphically. Like the difference between Sonic for Game Gear and Sonic for Genesis to me was just that there were different levels. Like the second level in Sonic for Game Gear was the bridge zone, whereas on the Genesis it was the marble zone. So there were different stages. You didn't really couldn't really appreciate probably so much the difference in the graphics and the sound quality. One thing about Sonic on the Game Gear was that when you fought Dr. Robotnik, it had a very different theme, a very more hectic, energetic theme. That's always Dr. Robotnik's theme in my head. And then when Sonic 3 and Sonic Triple Trouble came out at about the same time, and Sonic Triple Trouble was sort of positioned as the portable counterpart to Sonic 3 on the Genesis. And I remember like on MTV, like the hype about when they first introduced Knuckles, back when, introducing a new character was like a big deal and not just some gimmick they do in every single game. So, a new character is adding to Sonic, that's a big deal. Where's Knuckles? And I think there was some sort of giveaway with Coca-Cola or 7-Eleven or something like that. And, Knuckles was in Sonic Triple Trouble. And that was Sonic Triple Trouble, that was the first game I bought with money I had earned myself. And, oh man, that Sonic Triple Trouble is going to be the first Sonic game on the 3DS Virtual Console. Yes, we now live in a world where Game Gear games are now going to be downloadable on Nintendo's portable system. I mean, there's a reason I chose the black Game Boy SP. There's a reason I chose the black Nintendo 3DS. It's an homage to this thing. A black portable system, it's just like, that's where it all began for me. And now, my system of choice in the 8th generation on the portable space is once again black. And tomorrow, I cannot wait, will once again be playing Sonic Triple Trouble for the first time since this thing last worked. This thing hasn't worked in years. I just can't bear to give it away or throw it out or whatever. For the first time since perhaps 98 or 97, for the first time since the late 90s, I am going to be playing a Sonic the Hedgehog portable game on a Sonic the Hedgehog Game Gear game on a portable system. And I cannot wait. So, and there are other Sonic games coming too. Now, just to clear the waters a bit, there's a bit of a negative stigma against the Sonic Game Gear games. I came to love Sonic and Sonic the Hedgehog and Sega and gaming in general based on Sonic's portable adventures, so it's sort of it twists my heart a bit to hear people dissing on the Sonic Game Gear games who didn't grow up with them. Because I mean, think of it. At the time, compare Sonic, like Sonic on the Game Gear to Super Mario Land. It's like to have the sort of, not that Super Mario Land isn't a great game, and yes, I came to learn to love Sonic. I came to love both Game Boy and Game Gear. I owned both the Game Boy and Game Gear while they were current systems. I wasn't just a fanboy of Genesis forever, just to show you how loyal to Genesis I was. Like the first time, even I already owned Game Boy by the time and Nintendo 64 came out, so I was already like I was already familiar with the joys of Nintendo. But when I first saw Nintendo 64 on a poster in front of Toys R Us the day that system launched, I said, "Look at them! They're trying to make making their new system look like the Genesis. They're trying to be like Sega." That's how loyal I was to Sega. But I'm digressing a bit. Excuse me. So talking about the Sonic Game Gear games, I think they're putting Sonic Triple Trouble as their first Sonic Game Gear game on the Virtual Console because that's really one of the best. Uh, Sonic Triple Trouble is great. Sonic Chaos I never owned at the time back then. I never owned it back then. I really wasn't even aware that it existed. I mean, back then there was no internet to look games up. You'd see it in the magazines, or you'd see your friend with it, or you'd see it on store shelves. That's the only way you really knew that a game existed. So it wasn't really in the shops where I went game shopping, so I just never knew it existed back then. And it's ironic because, like, in Japan, I think Sonic Triple Trouble was actually called Sonic and Tails 2, and in Japan, Sonic Chaos is called Sonic and Tails. Anyway, yes, Sonic 1 for Game Gear. That was good. It shows its age a lot more than Sonic Triple Trouble does. If you've played Sonic on the on Master System on the Wii Virtual Console, it's basically the same game. Then Sonic 2. I never got far in Sonic 2. There were a lot of traps and hidden blocks you had to break through. When you're a little kid and you don't have a strategy guide and you're not that experienced with games, that's pretty tough. And that boss at the end of the first world, that sort of lava minecart themed level, where I kept trying to attack the crab that was at the bottom of the pit. The giant enemy crab. Yes, I had to say it. So, their boulders rolling down the hill, and I thought you were supposed to attack the crab somehow. No, you're actually supposed to avoid the boulders, and eventually the boulders destroy the crab after so many hits. But the timing on that jump on that little tiny screen, it's really tough. So I only got past the first world of Sonic 2 once when I was a little kid. Whew, I'm talking a lot. Reliving a lot of stuff I haven't really talked out loud about. But yes, Sega Game Gear is coming to Virtual Console. I cannot wait for tomorrow. It is going to be a blast. And if you want to learn about my experience with the Game Gear, which is basically my first experience with portable systems, there will be a link to an article I wrote on my website, supertrainstationh.com. And detailing, sort of autobiography of my Game Gear experience back when it was a current system. To talk a bit more about Sonic Game Gear games, Sonic 1, 2, and Triple Trouble. It's sort of funny how it's like 1, 2, and 3 almost, even though there's Sonic 1, 2, 3, Sonic Chaos, Sonic Triple Trouble. Those were all good. Sonic Labyrinth was not that good. That was one of the last Game Gear Sonic I bought. Actually, how about that? Sonic Labyrinth, which I keep thinking about in like maybe between 94 and 96, I think. Sonic Labyrinth, to this day, is the last Sonic game that I purchased, physical cartridge Sonic game that I purchased and own. Since then, I've rented a few, but I have not since owned a retail Sonic game. I'd like to get Sonic Generations for 3DS just to play a modern Sonic for a modern handheld system, just sort of relive my experience playing, Sonic on Game Gear back in the day. But Sonic Labyrinth is not very good. He moves a lot more like a slug than a hedgehog. Let's put it this way. The storyline for Sonic Labyrinth is that Robotnik, I will never call him Eggman, and except for in the context of Archie comics, but he's always going to be Dr. Robotnik to me. Robotnik stole Sonic's running shoes, so he can't run fast. Yes, that's the excuse they used for the sluggish isometric engine that they used for the pseudo 3D game. It's like, imagine Sonic 3D Blast, except for like absolutely not that good at all. And there's rumors that I've heard that Sega's going to bring, the next Sonic game is going to bring a Sonic Labyrinth, which I would not recommend, and Sonic Blast for Game Gear, which I think came out in 1997. I think certainly one of the very last Game Gear games they made, Sonic games they made for the Game Gear, one of the last Game Gear games whatsoever. That game, Sonic Blast, basically sort of tries sort of a Donkey Kong Country style thing where the graphics are all computer pre-rendered. and the sprites are huge. They look better, but they do not look nearly as good as the pixelated, smaller sprites of Sonic Triple Trouble. The controls are clunky. The music's not that great. It is a Sonic Blast and Sonic Labyrinth are just very sorry games. Like when I played Sonic Labyrinth and I rented one of the Sonic Collection things and I played Sonic Blast and I was like, wow, I feel sad inside playing this game. That's how I felt. I felt like how I felt the first time I saw the footage of the Transformers game for Famicom. It's just like it's so bad. I just literally feel sorry for the game itself. That like as though I just feel like the game itself is suffering in its very existence. Those games were so disappointing. But yeah, I've talked enough about my experience with the Game Gear. And soon and tomorrow it is going to be on the Virtual Console, and I could not be happier. So that's what I'm going to be playing tomorrow. That's my Game Gear experience. If you want to read more about it, click the link in the info box to my article about my Game Gear experience. And thank you very much for watching.